Welcome to the Pastor's Bible Study from Bethlehem Congregational Church.
Well, based on some of the conversation we had last week, I decided this week I would go with, actually I should have reversed those. Can I trust my Bible? But I think we've covered that well enough. You know you can trust your Bible, but which translation should you use and can you trust them, right? And there's going to be a couple times, this is going to be one of them, that I'm going to have to make references for people that are going to watch the video, because there's a couple people that have already said, I can't be there, please send me. So for the benefit of those that are watching on video, on YouTube, below the video, there is a box that says description. It's usually where I give a little blurb about what the message is about. In that box, a link for the study notes that I've already given everybody will be available. So you can pull those up on your computer and follow those as we're going along through the video. So look in the description box for the notes on that video. All right. So which translation should I use? Well, I thought I would start out based on one of the questions was the King James Version the first English Bible? I thought, well, why don't we start there? So let's start with a brief synopsis of the development of the English Bible. All right. And that started probably earlier than you think. Because the development of the English Bible spans over a millennium, and it reflects the desire to make Scripture available in the language of ordinary people. Like I asked you last week, how many of you can read Greek or Hebrew? None of you. So aren't you glad that there's an English Bible? All right. In fact, we have a veritable plethora of English Bibles, but I'll get to that a little later on. Okay. Between the 7th and 16th, or maybe the 14th, because when we look at the 16th too, but before a complete English Bible existed, portions of Scripture were translated into Old English by churchmen, one of them being Bede as early as 673. That's when he was born. So within the early 700s, which is 700 years before the King James Version, the Bible was being translated into English. By the late 14th century, John Wycliffe and his associates produced the first complete English Bible. John Wycliffe lived the Bible in this case was produced between 1382 and 1395. Okay, 200 years before we have a King James Bible. But because the original languages, Greek and Hebrew, weren't available to him, what he did was he translated the Vulgate, which was a Latin edition that was used in Roman Catholic churches. So he translated the Vulgate. And keep in mind, he was doing this before Gutenberg invented the printing press. So all the copies, what there were of them, were written by hand. Okay? So go buy a ream of paper, of notebook paper, and start in Genesis 1 and start writing and see how long it takes you.
Very many Bibles.
Yeah. No, there weren't very many Bibles. There weren't very many Bibles, and there were a lot of portions of Bibles. That's why what we have in manuscript evidence is a lot of times is a book rather than Bible, but we'll talk about that some more. All right, so when we get to the Reformation era, which is about the 1600s, William Tyndale produced the first printed English Bible, all right? And he did translate directly from the Greek. And he also translated portions of the Old Testament from Hebrew, but unfortunately, he was executed before he was able to complete the work.
What?
We'll get into that in a little bit, because I think, but I'm not 100% sure. So if I'm not sure, I'm gonna let you draw conclusions from what I'm about to say. But his work influenced all the subsequent English translations, including the King James Version. And following Tyndale came several important Christian English Bibles in the development. So the Coverdale Bible in 1535, translated those basically by Miles Coverdale, which is why it has his name. The Matthew Bible in 1537 combined Tyndale's work and Coverdale's work, because as I said, Tyndale didn't finish the Old Testament, so it combined the two. Then there was the Great Bible, authorized for use in churches under Henry VIII. What do we know about Henry VIII?
I don't know anything about Henry VIII.
Okay.
All these Bibles will still be handwritten.
No,
Oh.
no. After, yeah,
Oh, the printing presses, okay.
yeah. After Tyndale, which
Okay.
then all the rest of them would have been printed Bibles. Right? Henry VIII had a whole lot of wives and wanted divorce and didn't really like what the Catholics had to say, so he would have had a little bit of an agenda, right? Then in 1560 we get the Geneva Bible. Any of you heard of the Geneva Bible? Well, then I'm teaching this to the right group. Okay. The Geneva Bible was produced by English Protestant exiles in Geneva. That's why it was called the Geneva Bible. Remember that there was a big to-do in England. Was it going to be Protestant or was it going to be Catholic? And some kings were Protestant and some kings were Catholic, and it went back and forth and back and forth. That's why there were Protestant exiles, English Protestant exiles in Geneva. And the Geneva Bible became highly influential among English-speaking Protestants. And it was the Bible that was used by many Puritans. And I'm getting ahead of myself, but I'm going to go ahead and say it anyway. The Geneva Bible is the Bible that came over on the Mayflower. Okay? So, which you find interesting, you ought to. But then there was the Bishop's Bible in 1568, prepared by the Church of England's bishops as an alternative to the Geneva Bible, because Geneva was written by a bunch of Protestants. Now we have some bishops getting into. You see how there was a little bit of a, they had a little bit of an agenda in their translations here, okay? And the revised 1602 edition of the Bishop's Bible was prescribed as the base for the King James Bible, all right? Then there's one more, the Douay-Rheims Bible, which doesn't read significantly different. I have a copy of that. In fact, that is one of the Bibles that's available on the eSword app. Doesn't read significantly different than the King James, but there are some. But the New Testament was completed in 1582, the Old Testament in 1610. But it was a translation not from the original languages, but again, a translation from the Latin Vulgate by members of the English College in Douay, well, it's called Douay, and as a counter-Reformation effort. So when the Reformation was coming about, there were people that wanted to stay true to the church. So this was a translation for those people that wanted to stay true to the church. And they didn't want to use the Geneva Bible and its Protestant propaganda and so forth. And then the New Testament portion was published in Reims, France. That's why it's known as a Douay-Rheims Bible, all right? Now the one that we all know and love. King James, 1611. In 1604, King James the sixth and first. Huh? How is he the sixth and the first? I know, I scratched my head for a minute too till I remembered my history. He was King James the sixth of Scotland and King James the first of England. That's how he's the sixth and the first. He commissioned a new translation, and the result was the King James Version published in 1611. It was produced by approximately 50 scholars. It drew heavily on Tyndale's work and the Bishop's Bible, while consulting Hebrew and Greek manuscripts. Okay, but the primary motivation for the King James was to provide a new English Bible that would be acceptable throughout the Church of England and help reduce growing religious divisions. Again, who's it going to help? The Church of England. Can you see how there's a bit of an agenda, in the possibility for agenda? The Puritan leader John Reynolds proposed a new translation because existing English Bibles were viewed as inadequate in various respects. The two most prominent Bibles were the Geneva Bible that I've talked about. It was favored by many Puritans. It had many marginal notes and often contained strongly Calvinistic interpretations in their notes. The Bishop's Bible was the official Bible of the Church of England, but it never gained widespread popularity. So when the proposal was made, King James welcomed a proposal for a new translation because he particularly disliked the Geneva Bible because some of the marginal notes appeared to justify resistance to rulers. He's the king. He shouldn't argue with the king, right? He desired a Bible without partisan annotations that could be used uniformly throughout the kingdom. So we need to know that King James had an agenda, right? He had an agenda, but that can be said for a lot of translations. So don't let that prejudice you too much, okay? Various other translations also had an agenda. I mean, various other translations in the 20th century had an agenda. So keep that in mind.
Jamestown was 1607.
Jamestown was 1607. We're going to get there.
So, but I'm thinking,
So this was published 1611.
Exactly. I'm getting there. Don't get ahead of it.
Okay.
I'm getting there. Trust me. I will get to Jamestown. I promise you, being a good Virginian, I will get to Jamestown, right? All right. But the King James translators were instructed. They were given instruction. Translate directly from the best available Hebrew and Greek texts. Okay? Keep that in mind. We'll come back to that. They worked from the best available Hebrew and Greek texts. They worked with what they had. All right? They were to use the bishop's Bible as a base while consulting other earlier English translations while they were looking at the original languages they had, okay? They were instructed to especially avoid doctrinally controversial marginal notes that they saw. And my question is but what if those doctrinally controversial margin notes revealed what was truly in Scripture? Yeah. And they were to produce a translation suitable for public reading in churches. The result was the King James Version, first published in 1611. And much of its wording was inherited from the earlier work of William Tyndale, whose translations had profoundly shaped biblical English language, all right? So in summary, the King James Version was motivated by a desire for a uniform, accurate, and authoritative English Bible for the Church of England, free from sectarian notes from any Protestants or whoever, and capable of uniting diverse religious factions under a common text. And for more than 3 centuries, the King James dominated English-speaking Christianity and profoundly influenced English literature, theology, and culture. A lot of things that are in our culture because of that. And since you brought it up, it has. Has it occurred to you, and maybe not, but you noted it a little bit, the Jamestown colonists could not have brought the King James Bible.
Right. No,
All
they
right.
brought that other one with them.
Yeah, no, that was Mayflower I mentioned earlier. But they couldn't have brought the King James because they came in 1607 and the King James Version wasn't published until 1611. So they had to bring something else. Right. It would have been impossible to bring the King James. Several historical sources specifically identify the Geneva Bible. So, yes, the same one that came to Plymouth, Massachusetts, used in Jamestown. One archaeological source, notes that the Geneva Bible was the first English language Bible in North America, carried to Virginia in 1607 by Robert Hunt, chaplain of the Jamestown colony. Did you know that they had a chaplain? Well, there you go. Another archaeologist noted it was the Bible used in Jamestown and the preferred Bible of the early pilgrim settlers of New England. And that said, some historians cautioned that not every Bible in early Jamestown can be identified with certainty. There may have been some others there as well. Since the official authorized Church of England Bible before 1611 was the Bishop's Bible, it's possible that some of the copies accompanied with the clergy or some of the colonists. So the Bishop's Bible may have been along as well. But the most precise conclusion is to imagine that the primary Bible associated with the original Jamestown settlement in 1607 was the Geneva Bible, just like the one that was preferred by the Pilgrims, all right? So let's talk about the development of the English translations in the 19th and 20th century. Advances in textual criticism and the discovery of older biblical manuscripts led to new translations. All right? You see 1885, the English Revised Version. 1901, the American Standard Version. 1952, the Revised Standard Version. 1971, the New American Standard Bible. Remember I told you that when I started Bible college, we used the King James, because I started Bible college in the fall of 1973. So the New American Standard had only been out a couple of years and it didn't have wide acceptance yet. It became to have it. The Good News Bible, which came out first as Good News for Modern Man in 1976, the New International in 78, the New King James in 82, the New Revised Standard, I should say, in 89. The New Living Translation, what we use for pew Bibles, was 1996. It has since been updated, and what we have in our pews is the second edition, which is 2001, I think. I'm not sure. The English Standard Version is 2001. The Message, the paraphrase by Eugene Peterson, in 2002. The Christian Standard Bible in 2017. And the Legacy Standard Bible in 2022. And these translations vary in philosophy, ranging from a more formal word-for-word approach, that's called formal, but there's another word that escapes me right now. We'll get to it in a minute. Or a more dynamic thought-for-thought approach, okay? So are they trying to give you what the words were and let you get the meaning from that, or are they trying to look at the words and give you what the words meant? One of the things I learned in taking 3 years of high school French, which lets me maybe order a ham and cheese sandwich and ask what time it is. That's about how much I remember. But one of the idioms, and all languages have idioms, is mon petit chou, which is a term of endearment. Okay, it's like we would call somebody honey or something like that. But mon petit chou, literally translated, means my little cabbage head. Which comes into problems. So are you trying to say what were they trying to communicate, or are they giving you the words and then you need to know the culture to know what that meant? And so that's some of the differences that we're going to look at tonight. All right?
Yes, David. Didn't you say last week that some were translations and some were, did you say paraphrase?
Mm-hmm. I did.
And the Message, is that not one that's
That's why I said the Message was a paraphrase by Eugene Peterson.
But I mean, what about any of those others? They going to get to that?
Don't you know me now that I give you evidence and I build the case for whatever I'm teaching? Okay, you should know me by now. All right. So a summary of all of that. The English Bible developed from early Old English renderings, people taking a portion of it and translating and so forth. Then through Wycliffe's translation from the Latin Vulgate to Tyndale's work in the original Hebrew and Greek texts. The Reformation gave rise to several versions culminating in the King James in 1611. Then contemporary translations continue to build upon centuries of scholarship and the abundance of available manuscript information, striving to convey the scriptures accurately and clearly to contemporary readers. Okay? Let me tell you a little bit about, let me back up actually, so you don't have to look at tell you a little bit about these, all right? The New American Standard Bible is produced by the Lockman Foundation as a revision of the American Standard Bible, thus why it is a New American Standard. And it is known for, that's the word I was trying to remember, formal equivalence, translation philosophy. That's when you're getting close, when you're looking at the words, not the meanings, not trying to rephrase it into modern English. You're trying to find the best translation for the words that are in the Greek or in the Hebrew. So that's a formal equivalence. The Good News Bible, originally called Today's English Version, or also Good News for Modern Man, was published by the American Bible Society and is known for its dynamic equivalent translation and philosophy. But you know what I think I need to do? Hang on a minute, because my notes are hiding some things from me. Okay, yeah, I'm going to continue with this. So I'll edit that out and it never happened. All right, so the Good News Bible, or called Today's English Version originally, was published by the American Bible Society and is known for its dynamic equivalence, translation philosophy. So they're trying to, let me phrase this for you so you will understand it best. NIV was developed by the Committee on Bible Translation and is one of the most widely used evangelical translations. The New King James was produced by Thomas Nelson to modernize the language of the King James while retaining its Hebrew and Greek textual tradition. And when I say textual tradition, the King James and the New King James are translated from the Masoretic text, which is a Hebrew collection, and the Textus Receptus, which is just Latin for received text, which is a set of Greek manuscripts. We'll talk about that a little bit more. The use of those earlier discovered but subsequently copied text is a primary factor that distinguishes these translations from most of the other contemporary ones, all right? The new Revised Standard was sponsored by the National Council of Churches and revised the Revised Standard Version and became widely used in many academic, liturgical, and mainline Protestant settings, okay? Mainline Protestant settings. There's an argument that Baptists were never Protestant because they didn't protest for anything. They just always were. That's a Baptist claim. So they didn't protest and come out of the Catholic Church. They just were always out of the Catholic Church. But the Revised Standard Version is not accepted in Baptist churches, and that's the largest Protestant denomination in the United States. So I'm not sure that's a good statement for what I got on that particular translation. But anyway, the New Living Translation we know, but it grew out of the popular paraphrase, the Living Bible. But what they did, the Living Bible, which is not on my chart, but the Living Bible was a paraphrase, right? The New Living Translation is that. It is a translation. So rather than a division, it's a completely new translation. They went back to the original languages, but tried to put it in a similar wording to the Living Bible. But they did go back to original languages. And in that case, they had about 90 scholars on the translation committee for the New Living Translation. The English Standard Version is a revision and, in my opinion, an improvement of the Revised Standard Version. And that's why I say it's improvement, because now there's a new Revised Standard Version. But it seeks, in their words, an essentially literal translation approach, all right? The Message was produced by Eugene Peterson as a contemporary language paraphrase rather than a formal translation. Individual books appeared starting in 1993, and finally the whole Bible in 2002. The Christian Standard Bible, which those of you that are part of Sunday school know about that because it's what the literature uses, it's a revision of the Hallman Christian Standard Bible, which was in 2004, and it employs what its translators called optimal equivalence. And I told you it does the best of any of them being right in the middle between the formal word for word and the, this side of paraphrase, but the dynamic equivalence. It tries to split the difference and does a pretty good job of it most of the time. All right. The Legacy Standard Bible is an update of the 1995 New American Standard Bible, produced by scholars associated with the Master's Seminary. And it emphasizes consistency in translating key Hebrew and Greek terms and restores the divine name of Yahweh in many passages. So you hear, when I read the Legacy Standard, you hear me reading Yahweh because that's what's in that Bible, rather than Lord, which would probably be in yours. But the situation that I mentioned Sunday, and we'll come back to that verse again, but in the King James, Mark and Luke both use the same word, sozo. But the King James translates it as using one of the definitions for sozo in Mark and a different definition for the same word when it translates it in Luke. Now, why would you? It's the same word. And so the Legacy Standard, when it comes to a word, they sat down and, okay, where does this occur? And what does it mean? Because it should only mean one thing throughout Scripture, except in very rare cases. And so that's what one of the goals that they had was to create a consistency in translation. So when you find that word, you find that same word wherever you find it, okay? All right. I read you about the synopsis, even though I just changed the slide. Now, so when we convert all of those words I just read you into the real world, what does it look like? What's the practical application of all this information? Well, maybe that'll help. Okay, maybe that'll help. You see, in my color, because we don't have a color printer, so I had to change it for what's on your page. But the formal equivalences are purple, right? You see over to the left. Well, obviously the interlinear is white because that's an interlinear. Do you know what an interlinear is? Any of you? Okay, it will have the Greek text, and then right below it, it will have the English text in the same line for all the verses. So interlinear is actually going to be the Greek with an English translation with it. But now, the formal equivalence, you see the farthest to the left there is the Legacy Standard Bible, then the New American Standard Bible, then the King James, and then right with the King James is the English Standard Version. But surprisingly, you'll notice that the New King James is a little bit to the right of the King James Bible. And you'll notice that a little bit of the blue, which stands for dynamic equivalence, starts sneaking in, just a little bit, starts sneaking into the New King James. And then you've got the New Revised Standard Version, which has just a little bit of purple, okay? But then it's in, yeah, I know, when you get that much information, it's hard to make it big enough to see. And then you've got the Tree of Life version, which is the Messianic version that I like to use, which has some formal equivalence, but leans more to the dynamic equivalence. Then you've got the Christian Standard Bible, which tries to split the difference, but winds up kind of more in the dynamic equivalent. Then the NIV is even further into dynamic equivalent. And then when you get to the New Living, it's getting over towards, it's still dynamic equivalent, but it's got some of the phrasing so that it starts to sound a little like a paraphrase, even though it's a translation. Then you've got the Good News Bible, which basically is a paraphrase, but not quite. It still sticks with that. And then you've got the Message, which is, and the Living Bible would come over here with the complete paraphrase, right? Does that give you an idea of where they fall in word to word, to thought for thought, or the paraphrase is one Eugene Peterson wrote. There was no committee. Eugene Peterson decided what the Bible ought to say and wrote it down as the Message. He did a really good job in most places. A few places where he's out of it a little bit, but for most places.
But you know, I have a copy of that. When you read it, and you're trying to find it like verse for verse, it's not there. It's more like a story.
And Laurie and I remember, or maybe I was remembering telling her, but before I went into pastoral ministry, I was a Sunday school teacher at the church where we were, and we were teaching. I was teaching through something but we wound up in Revelation. I don't think I was teaching through Revelation. We wound up with a reference in Revelation, and we would take turns reading because we didn't use printed literature like that. And this one lady had the New Living Translation, and she read a verse out of Revelation, and everybody else in the class was, is she in the right place?
Right.
Because it wasn't anything like what any of the rest, and I wish I could remember the reference. It wasn't anything like what any of the rest of our Bible said. And it's that dynamic equivalence thing. When they start trying to tell you what the person that wrote it thought, or what they were trying to say, they don't always get it right. Okay? But sometimes when they do the formal stuff and they give you the words, it doesn't always give you exactly the meaning that they meant, because we're going to run into a situation like that on Sunday.
Doesn't the whole thing fill out on any of them? The translations of the people who did the work?
Yes, every one of them. Every one of them. And that's why you should always, whenever possible, but most of the time if possible, go with a translation that had a committee of theologians sitting down discussing what word should we use with this.
I don't like the idea of a bunch of people sitting around talking about passage that they have read.
Well,
and they come up with an idea of what you're saying.
But no, they come up with what the best linguistics are. Otherwise,
But who's to say that that's the best?
that's why you have 50, 60, 70, 80 of them, so you can come up with it. Otherwise, you need to learn Hebrew. Okay? All right. So now, what does that look like? This chart shows you where the translations fall in comparison to one another. But what does that look like in real life? All right? Let's do some more real life practical stuff. And use the verse that I talked about Sunday as a starting part. Mark 10:52. Now, it looks like there's a consensus of opinion. If I give this to you, this is what it looks like. Okay, I hope you can see that. That's the problem when you try to put that much information. Maybe you can see it better on your page. I'm not sure. But when you try to put that much information in it, yeah. When you try to put that much information in it, this is what you wind up with. So I didn't bring my pointer tonight, I don't think. So I'll have to get up. This, Greek. It's New Testament, so it's Greek. This is an interlinear, guy. Okay? This is an interlinear. All right? The word in question is here. You see the interlinear, maybe if you can see it. The interlinear translates it as to save. Okay? This is the verse I was talking about, where the Legacy Standard says, your faith has saved you. And what I did, I went down all of these translations we looked at on the chart. I went down. When the New American Standard translates it, it says, your faith has made you well. The English Standard translates it, your faith has made you well. The King James says, thy faith hath made thee whole. New King James, your faith has made you well. The Christian Standard Bible says, your faith has saved you. Tree of Life version, which is not red letter, says, your faith made you well. NIV says, your faith has healed you. New Living Translation says, your faith has healed you. The Good News Bible says, your faith has made you well. And the Message says, your faith has saved and healed you. So Eugene took the best of both and put them both in there, okay? Now, one of the things that seems to me, well, first of all, you'll notice that the LSB and the CSB, so the Legacy Standard and the Christian Standard Bibles, are in the minority because they translate sozo as saved. Okay? And that's interesting to me because that's one Bible that is as far as you can go before an interlinear and one that tries to be right in the middle of the road. And they both selected the words saved you rather than made you well. So I find it interesting that two versions from different schools of interpretation would come up with that word and be in the minority when everybody else uses your faith has made you well. But notice that there's not a stark contrast in either. You know, they both, okay, saved you, as I said on Sunday. It could have saved you from sin. It could have saved you from your blindness. It made you well, okay? You can be made well from sin. You can be made well from blindness. So there's not a huge stark contrast between any meaning of any of those. But the various translations have various renderings of a particular verse. Now, something that I mentioned to you previously as kind of a check, the benchmark, if you will. I told you if somebody says, oh, I've got a new Bible, tell me what you think of it. Go to Isaiah 7:14. Now, obviously, in Isaiah, there's not going to be anything in the Greek New Testament. Why? Because the Old Testament's written in Hebrew. It wouldn't be in a Greek New Testament, okay? If I had a Septuagint, I could put it up there, but all right. This is a verse you know. Therefore, the Lord himself will give you a sign. Behold, the virgin will be with child. Okay, LSB. New American Standard. Behold, the virgin will conceive. English Standard. Behold, the virgin shall conceive. King James. Behold, a virgin. New King James. Behold, the virgin. Christian Standard. See the virgin. Tree of Life. Behold, the virgin will conceive. NIV, the virgin. New Living Translation, look, the virgin will conceive. Good News Bible, a young woman who is pregnant will have a son. One of these things is not like the other so far. All right. The Message. Watch for this. A girl who is presently a virgin will get. So that, what he was trying to do, that there is an opinion out there that Mary is perpetually a virgin. I think Jesus' brothers and sisters probably, kind of knocks that in the head, but there are people that believe that, okay? And then I put this in there and nowhere else. I put this in just for another bad example. The International Standard Version, which is somewhat accepted, says, watch, the young lady is conceiving a child.
Wow.
Not quite the same thing as a virgin. That's why I say, if you want to know, are you reading a good translation or not? Go there. And you see that most of those are, but then again, I'm really not going to reference a bunch of trash to you guys other than for the example for the two that are there, right? All right. And I saw that and I included the International Standard because one of the things, it's one of the free Bibles that you could get with the eSword software we're going to be looking at. But I also put it there, like I said, because I wanted another bad example of a translation. And I find it interesting where the ISV falls on the chart. You see, it's in dynamic equivalence, but on the left of dynamic equivalence, and it falls more towards formal than the Tree of Life or the Christian Standard Bible, and yet it comes up with that stuff, which was kind of made me want to scratch my head a little bit. The International Standard Version came out in 2011. It describes its approach as literal idiomatic translation. Okay? And it tries to split the difference, kind of like the CSB, but doesn't do it nearly as well. And I'm not going to go into an awful lot. I keep looking at that clock and the batteries are back there are gone. So they've tried to do, and it's not great. And what they're saying is that they argue that the traditional word for word versus thought for thought creates a circumstance you shouldn't have. You should just make a really good translation that incorporates all of it, which is a lot of good words, but in practicality, it's awfully hard to do, okay? So memorize the reference, Isaiah 7:14. If you want to memorize the verse, that's great too, but at least memorize the reference, and that way when somebody comes up to you, because trust me, there's new translations coming out all the time. Isaiah 7:14. Hey, I just got this new Bible. What do you think? Go to Isaiah 7:14, see what it says. That'll give you your first good idea. All right, let's look at one more. And if you good, most of you brought your Bibles. Turn with me to John chapter 5. John chapter 5. And I'm going to show you a picture of one of the screens from, in fact, the screens I was just showing you, not this one, but the ones I showed you before, are screen grabs from eSword. I'm going to show you one more of that. And I've eliminated some of the translations because before I show you the stretched out the way I did before, I want to show you some columns. And I've eliminated some of the translations. I'm showing you all of them. I've eliminated some of the translations here to make a point and to try to make it a little more visible, okay? So, you're with me in John chapter 5, verse 3 and 4 is what I'm going to wind up looking at, all right? 3 and 4. Oops, there it is, okay. It's talking about the man there at the pool, okay? And talking about around the pool, I'll read you the King James right now. In these lay a great multitude of impotent folk, of blind, halt, withered, waiting for the moving of the water. Verse 4, for an angel went down at a certain season into the pool and troubled the water. Whosoever then first, after the troubling of the water, stepped in, was made whole of whatsoever disease he had. Okay? So those are the verses as you'd read them in the King James. Now, these guys are not interlinear. These are Greek New Testaments. This, in the left-hand column, is the Greek Textus Receptus. I mentioned that earlier. This is a different set of manuscripts, a later set of manuscripts. The problem is, it's a later set of manuscripts, but the manuscripts that are included in that collection are older than the earlier discovered manuscripts. So you notice here, okay, you got a verse 4 in the Legacy Standard Bible. When you get to the Christian Standard Bible, you got nothing. When you get to the New Living Translation, you got nothing. When you get to the other, I won't bother you with names, the other set of Greek manuscripts, you got nothing. And if you can see it in the Legacy Standard Bible, it says, in these lay a multitude of those who were sick, blind, lame, and withered, and then there's a bracket starting in the middle or towards the end of verse 3, and there's a bracket at the end of verse 4. If you were to look in the footnotes of all of these three, and you notice over here, it just says omit. If you look in the footnotes of any of the newer translations, they're all going to say, now the Legacy Standard keeps it in, but it's all going to have a footnote that says, this verse is not found in the earliest manuscripts. Means at some point in time, by the time the Textus Receptus came around, somebody had decided it needed to be there. But the earliest manuscripts don't have it. Now, does that worry you? It shouldn't. What it means is our scholarship is bringing us back to the Bible that God wanted us to have, not something that some well-meaning scribe set up for us. Now, if you were to move that into what you had seen before, okay, you've got the interlinear, and it includes it because this interlinear comes from the Greek Textus Receptus, so that verse is there. The Legacy Standard has it, but you see with the bracket. The New American Standard does not have that verse. Neither does the English Standard. The King James Version has that because it was translated from the Greek Textus Receptus. The earlier discovered manuscripts, but not the earliest manuscripts that have been found since. There was a huge cache, and I'm going to show you this in the video, but there was a huge cache of manuscripts found two places. One of them you know about, we've talked about it. The Dead Sea Scrolls, right? The Dead Sea Scrolls, you know about that one. There was an even bigger discovery in the late 1800s in Egypt. Those were things, obviously, if it was in the 18 and 1900s, the guys doing the King James translation didn't have access to these manuscripts. Like I said, they translated from the best of what they had, but so much has been discovered since that we can go, well, wait a minute, this is not here in this one. And we can determine pretty much within, a time frame when it got added. And even depending on where the manuscripts came from, where it got added. Okay? But you notice, okay, it's in the King James and New King James, not in the CSB, not in the TLV, NIV, NLT. You see, it's in the Textus Receptus, because there it is, but it's not in the Westcott Hort translation, because it wasn't in the earliest manuscripts. And that's going to worry some of you. Okay? So when I put that in that format, I have to point that out to you because it's so small as to be of not much use. Even on the page, I'm not sure how much it is. Okay? So I put it there for you to see that the modern translations, if they didn't come from the Greek Textus Receptus, then the verse isn't there. And that's why. Now, I know you're going to be worried. So how many of you have heard of Wes Huff? Anybody? Wesley Huff. You need to know about Wes Huff, okay? And because what I'm going to do is for the next 15 minutes or so, we may run a minute or two over, but I'm going to let Wes Huff and Andy Steiger of Apologetics Canada explain this stuff to you. Now, you need to listen to Wes because Andy's basically interviewing him. They're talking back and forth some, but it's mostly Wes. You need to listen to Wes. Wes is the vice president of Apologetics Canada. So he goes around speaking about various things. He holds a BA in sociology from York University. He has a master's of theological studies from Tyndall University. Here's the problem. He is currently working on a PhD in New Testament. Okay? So that means he's still immersed in Christian academia. And I can tell you from experience that rewires your brain and makes you talk like a theologian, because he's trying to convince people that he deserves to be Dr. Huff. So he's got that kind of mindset. Sometimes listening to him makes my head hurt. Okay. So listen carefully to what he's saying, because this video was created for regular people. I got it off of YouTube. And I should say that because of this being his material, now what I did was I edited it, because it was like a 22 or 23 minute video, I think. And it shows them in Egypt. Well, part of the time while they're in Egypt, we're driving. Well, driving through Egypt is not part of what we're about. Part of it's in them eating, and they like to eat. So I've cut out things. The educational portions I have left. The entertainment portions I have cut out. But because of that, because it's Apologetics Canada and Wes Huff's material, YouTube may not let me upload this video, my video, including their material. In which case, if that is what you find, what I find when I go try to upload it tonight, in the link in the description, along with the link for the study guide, there will be a link for Wes's video, so you can watch it in its original form. Okay. So, with that said, let me let them talk.
With all the work that you've done in seminary, with your doctoral work in the area of theology and manuscripts, what got you interested in the Bible?
I realized that I was engaging with a lot of people, with Muslims, with Mormons, with Jehovah's Witnesses, skeptics of all different stripes. All of them would resort to some sort of, well, that sounds great, Wes, but all you're relying on is the Bible. That's your foundation. And you can't trust that. All you have are translations of translations of translations. All you have are error-ridden copies. You don't even know if you have the right books. You're reading Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, but have you ever heard of the Gospel of Thomas? And so I realized that that was a genuine critique if it was true. If that was true, I'm staking my entire life on the person of Jesus. And where do I find the information about Jesus? I find that in the Bible. And if I can't trust the Bible, I really have no reason to put my hope and trust in Jesus. So part of the trickiness with the Bible is that we think of the Bible as one book because we have it in a nice single bound volume. But the Bible is not one book as much as it's 66 books. 66 books written over a period of 1,600 years on 3 different continents by close to 40 different authors in 3 different languages. 2 major languages, Greek and Hebrew, and 1 minor language, Aramaic. But you might be asking the question, well, why are Andy and I here in Egypt to talk about the complexities and issues regarding the Bible? When we're talking about the history of the Bible, the vast majority of those handwritten copies, what we call the manuscripts of the Bible, and particularly the earliest ones, come from Egypt.
Almost immediately after its production, the books of the Bible were being copied and translated into numerous languages and spread across the ancient world. This means that the modern English Bible we have today is some 2,000 years removed from even the last book written in it. How can we know that what we have was accurately copied and translated over that time? It was discoveries of ancient papyri in places like the city of Oxyrhynchus that allow us to answer this question. This city, on the banks of the River Nile, was where papyrus was being grown and made into writing material. It was in the garbage dumps of Oxyrhynchus where a treasure of ancient manuscripts was eventually discovered. In 1895, fresh graduate from Queen's College, England and Oxford, Bernard Grenfell and his friend Arthur Hunt left England on a trip to come to Egypt, sponsored by the Egyptian Exploration Society. Their purpose was not to find monumental architecture or statuary, which was the purpose of archaeology at the time, but to find papyri
After excavating a number of graveyards and cities to no avail, they eventually discovered here in and around the area of Albanasa, known then as Oxyrhynchus papyri. In fact, between 1895 and 1897, over 500,000 papyri were discovered, including every book of the Bible and a number of influential classical and religious texts.
Wes, I think a question that a lot of people ask is if these discoveries in places like Oxyrhynchus are fairly recent discoveries of these ancient manuscripts, well, what were we relying on before then, and could we trust our Bible? I mean, when we're comparing the Bible that we've had to these ancient manuscripts, like how does it line up?
When they discovered the earliest copies of the papyri, really within the last 200 years, what it didn't do was alter the way that we understood the text of the Bible before that. Even though we had these large spans of time in between when the earliest copies or the originals are being written and when we start to, think of the King James Bible in the early 17th century, when we discovered the papyri, what they didn't do was completely blow up how we understood the text of the Bible. In fact, what they did is simply confirm that what we had was surprisingly, shockingly close to the text that we had even centuries and millennia later.
From the time of the first copies down through the centuries, the Bible hasn't stopped being copied and translated. In fact, the New Testament writers themselves were using a translation, a copy of the Hebrew Old Testament books translated into Greek that we now call the Septuagint.
We're here in Alexandria, Egypt, at the Library of Alexandria, not the ancient Library of Alexandria, that hasn't been around for a long time. But Alexandria was a key and special place within both Jewish and Christian history. About 200 years before Jesus, the Old Testament, and particularly the first 5 books of the Bible, the Torah, were commissioned, most likely in Alexandria, to be transitioned out of the Hebrew and into the Greek. The Library of Alexandria, the ancient Library of Alexandria, and the city of Alexandria stood as a focus and an important key point geographically for both Jewish and Christian history.
Although translated into many languages, the Bible is not itself a translation of a translation. Like we see in the example of the Septuagint, Judeo-Christianity has always been a literary tradition that has never stopped copying and translating its books in order to be read. Almost immediately after its production, the books of the Bible were being copied and translated into numerous languages across the ancient world. When we look back at how we actually go from ancient papyrus to modern-day print, the history of the Bible is not some sort of layered web of translations. In reality, what we find ourselves with is a single step, going from the original Hebrew and Greek directly into our Bibles today. The translation of the Bible takes into consideration an amazing collection of archaeological evidence, from discoveries in Israel like the Dead Sea Scrolls, to papyri dug up in places like Oxyrhynchus. Over time, as we've uncovered more of these fragments and manuscripts, they haven't complicated our understanding of the Bible, but clarified it. The documents that sit behind the history of the Bible and the way that we translate them today gives us confidence in their reliability to go from the original languages into our own. Even though we're almost 2,000 years removed from the last book of the Bible that was written, as discoveries are made, we are not getting farther away from the text, but getting closer. This evidence confirms and gives us good reason to trust that our Bibles have been faithfully and accurately copied, and that what we have now is what the original authors wrote.
So one thing I've always appreciated about the Bible is it's not trying to hide anything from you. It, in fact, will note when there is a difference. If it's a word or if something was missing in a different manuscript, it'll tell you.
Yeah, a lot of people, I think, when they see that there are differences within the manuscripts, they panic. They think that's a problem. And they see our Bible has been changed. And I would say, yes, that is true to a certain degree. But our Bible has been changed, And that doesn't give us a picture of confusion within the history of the Bible. It actually gives us clarity within understanding the text of the Bible. When we have these differences, the fact is we know that there are the differences. So when you read your modern translation of the Bible and you see a citation note at the bottom of the page, that shouldn't make you panic. What that should do is give you confidence that we have such a glut of information that we're able to pinpoint those things to a very credible and exact level.
One of the things that catches a lot of people off guard when they're reading the Bible is they'll come across a verse that's missing, and that might surprise some of you, something like John chapter 5, verse 4. There isn't a John chapter 5, verse 4. So how do we understand that? Why are there verses in our Bible missing?
Yeah, I think people, when they come on these quote-unquote missing verses, it kind of surprises them. They'll look at their modern English translation and they'll see there's no John chapter 5, verse 4. And they go back and it's in their King James. So who took that verse out and when? Well, realistically, it's not about who took that verse out and when, it's about who put that verse in and when. And because we have such a glut of information in regards to the manuscript tradition and the text of the Bible, we're able to pinpoint when those things happened. Because of this, we're able to figure out, okay, a scribe at some point in history, say, wrote what we now have, because remember, the verses were added much later. They're not original to the text. The chapter and verse divisions were added in later centuries. And so when we find out John didn't write what we have in John chapter 5, verse 4, but a later scribe wrote that, well, we don't reverse the entire Bible. That's going to mess up all of our Bible memorization. It's going to mess up all of the commentaries that have been written throughout history that do include the verses. And so what we do is we simply put John chapter 5, verse 4, and we add a citation note at the end of the page.
Okay, the earlier we go and the more we look at the different manuscripts, we can see that this was added at this point. And again, we're going to footnote that and say that shouldn't be there.
And the ancient scribes did their own version of footnoting. When we discovered the story of the woman caught in adultery in the Gospel of John is missing from our earliest papyri, it didn't blow up the way we understood that story. Scribes all along have been noting some copies that we have it, some copies that we have don't have it. And so they're adding little scribal notations to say, we're not sure about this text, we're not sure about that text, but they would include things even if they weren't sure whether it was part of the original or not. No, we have not 100% of the text, we have 110% of the text. Because what that means is that even though things were added, the scribes were so tenacious to include everything that the original text is in there. And it's kind of like a puzzle. If you had a puzzle with 100,000 pieces and you opened it up and you found that you actually had not 100,000 pieces, but 100,100 pieces, once you start to put the puzzle together, you can see where the image is. You can see where pieces were added from another puzzle by accident, or maybe that someone came along and they added extra pieces. Once the picture starts to come together, it's really clear to figure out, well, what does and doesn't belong. And that's kind of like the text of the Bible. Once we put together the pieces of the text of the Bible, we can see this piece doesn't belong, this piece does belong.
That being the case, Wes, why do the scribes make some of these changes in the text?
Well, a lot of them are just mistakes, and mistakes you and I would make if we were handwriting documents. You know, I do this all the time.
I do this a lot.
In my emails, all my froms are forms, that kind of thing. It doesn't have to be handwriting, but when you're dealing with handwriting, we do make mistakes. The vast majority of these textual variants, of these scribal changes, are spelling differences. Because remember, spelling was not organized or standardized till much later. But if I spell Andy with 2 D's or 1 D, you can still figure out that I'm trying to write Andy. And a lot of them, they didn't even necessarily catch these changes. So the vast majority are things like spelling, our word order. You know, as long as there are particular grammatical and syntactical linguistic clues, we can figure out what the sentence says. So the vast majority of these differences within the Bible are inconsequential and make no difference in the translation out of the original language.
I think a question that a lot of people might be asking is, well, how big are these variances? Are these significant? Are they doctrinal in nature?
Even though we have these differences, no textual variants affect any essential Christian doctrine. There's nothing that relies on one verse that has a question about it in the history of the textual traditions of the Bible.
So Wes, we have confidence that what we have in our New Testament is what the original authors wrote, and the books that we have are the documents that get us closest to the time frame of Jesus. But it could very well be the case that we just have the most historically attested lies.
We could have what the original authors wrote, like you said, but they just could have made it up. Or they could have been diluted. So how do we know that it's not only the right words that were written on those ancient documents, but that it's true?
Luke goes to lengths to demonstrate that his narrative is placed within an actual time and location. In the first 3 verses of Luke chapter 3, we are not only given 7 historical characters that mark out the beginning of the ministry of John the Baptist, but within these 3 verses alone are 22 historical references to locations and people that have been verified by archaeology and ancient literary sources outside of the Bible. This places Luke's account within a historical framework, making sure his readers know he's not merely making up a story, but pinpointing when and where these events actually took place in history. And the Gospel authors do this in multiple different ways, with names, locations, as well as with accurate plant and animal life related to the areas within the narratives they are describing. The Gospel authors get these types of facts right, even when other ancient writers of the time don't.
It's the details that make the difference. The gospel authors are going to lengths to try to communicate that what they are saying is history. Right at the beginning of the Gospel of Luke, in his preface, he says that he's writing up an orderly account. That term, account, that he uses in the original language in Greek is the same word that other ancient writers like Josephus and Lucian use when they talk simply about how to write good history. The Gospel authors, they want to make sure you know that what they're writing is not just important, but that it's actually true. One of the most important ancient writers within this time period is a guy named Tacitus. In Tacitus's Annals, Book 1544, he describes what the Christians are doing and believing in that time, and he says that Jesus Christ was crucified under Pontius Pilate. But he describes Pontius Pilate as being the procurator. Now, that is actually not the right description of what Pontius Pilate was. You know, in 1961, in Caesarea Maritime, there was a stone that was found, which is known as the Pontius Pilate stone, which has the title of Pontius Pilate, governor of this area. But you know who gets the right title for Pontius Pilate? Luke. Luke, in his gospel, accurately describes and uses the correct Greek term for Pontius Pilate being the governor of Judea. This is something that one of the most prominent ancient writers during that time, of which we know most of our information, or a good portion at least of our information, about who the ancient emperors were, he gets this title wrong, whereas the gospel authors get it right.
Our journey through the sands of Egypt has shown that we have the right books that make up the Bible. The gospel biographies of Jesus, included within it, get us in closest proximity to his life and teaching. Its books have been faithfully preserved and seek to give us an accurate history of the events that actually took place. Although we sit thousands of years downstream from the events recorded in these ancient documents, there are good reasons to believe that you can trust the Bible.
That's an excerpt from a series that Apologetics Canada has called Can I Trust the Bible? So look for it on YouTube. Questions. I hope that helped explain what happened with translations, why we can trust our translations, why there are variances in some of the translations. It depends on the manuscript, okay? But I asked 2 questions in my opening slide. Can you trust the Bible? Well, hopefully they just answered that for you. The second one was, which translation should I choose? Whichever one you will read and understand the most. For me, it is a formal equivalence. I want that words and because I'm doing the digging. For you, you might want something like the Christian Standard that kind of falls in the middle, or even the New Living Translation that's over here, that it's going to leave out of a lot of that was a misspeak. It's going to leave out a few of the details in an effort to give you something that is much more readable, much more understandable. Okay? If you want to go back to the King James, New King James, if you just really love that formal language, that's fine. It's not a bad translation, but there are things, evidence that has been found later that created the changes in the new translation. So just because they're different than the King James doesn't make them wrong or bad, okay? So whichever one you read, whichever one the Holy Spirit uses to speak to you, that's the translation you should use, all right?
What do we have here in the church? What is that Bible?
So, I'm sorry?
What is the Bible we have here in the church?
New Living Translation.
New Living.
Mm-hmm. Very easy to read, and there's a few little details here and there that it won't cover, but that's it, all right? So hopefully I didn't confuse, I'm sorry?
You lean towards the Legacy Standard Bible.
Mm-hmm.
But that came out, looked like in there around 2022 or something
Yep.
like that. So what was your go-to Bible before that?
Aha. That's a good question, because when I started, well, I've been through a bunch. Because without going in, I think I've told you this before. In the years, I spent some years running away from God, and so forth. When
How'd that work for you?
what do you think? It's like me telling him I wasn't going to be a preacher. When God got hold of me and brought me back, I started out with the New American Standard Bible. Okay, and I started working from there. And in reading that, I found things because it was in a modern, and it was not the 95, obviously, it was before that. One of the first translations of it, or editions of it. And I started reading things and seeing things differently than what I had been taught, which made me go to, okay, is that the New American Standard or is that? And so I did the research to find out, why is this different? So fast forward. I started out when I was at New Journey. I may have started out with the New American Standard. But as I was going, I discovered that people just weren't getting it. So I switched over and started using the Christian Standard Bible because it's not as formal. The language is a little bit different, stuff like that. Obviously, I left that. Yeah, the New International Readers is even further towards dynamic equivalence than the New Living Translation. But I did study before I went to pastoral ministry. I used the NIV, and I used the CSB for a while. But as I studied the CSB, and probably as I warned you about people that go into religious, Christian academia, probably when I started finishing my master's and getting into the doctoral work and stuff like that, I got more to wanting the formal equivalence. But what I'm trying to do, and I don't know how well I'm accomplishing it, but is explain what the formal equivalence is saying as I'm teaching people now. I want that detail for myself, but I know not everybody does, so I try to bring it back towards the center as I teach. But there's so many things that we miss if we don't integrate the culture and different things like that. So that kind of answered what you were asking. All right. Okay. All right. Well, the one that you're going to read, the one that you're going to study, that's the one to work with. And where you go from there is, okay, you've got a translation you want to use. Let's find a commentary you want to use, stuff like that. So.